do here is we design experiences, and I want to talk a little bit about design. I also want to talk about how we ended up where we are, our own transformation from a marketing firm to a very purpose-driven design firm. And then I want to give you some tools. I'm going to go through some projects and some of the process we use in these projects. Because a lot of the things we do, you can do without being a designer. You're going to walk away today with 4 tools that you can use even though you might have never used Photoshop. So that's the goal here today. And I'm going to start with this quick sketch. It's a sketch I picked up from Bruce Mau, who's one of my big inspirations and mentors in the design world, and had a chance to do a workshop with him, where he talked about how design's really moving from being a service of business, right? On the left, the design being a service of business, business being part of culture, culture being part of nature, to design becoming a discipline that really encompasses all of these dimensions. So we still want to design things that are good for business. We want to have sustainable products. But we also got to consider the culture we create. And we heard a lot about culture today already. We want to think about nature and creating sustainable models that can actually grow and scale. And we're really seeing the shift from design being the creation of beautiful objects to the creation of and the design of ecosystems. And this is how we like to relate to design in the work we do, and that's also reflected in our mission statement, which is to help organizations solve some of the world's greatest challenges by creating experiences that move people. And I understand it's a bit of a grand vision. And I want to walk you through our process of how we ended up at the grand vision, because it wasn't always like that. About 3 years ago, our portfolio looked something like this. A lot of big corporate clients, a lot of advertising work, and really all the work we did then was in this sort of left hemisphere of design. Design as a business of service, design to sell things that were already produced, aka advertising. And we asked ourselves, well, if we could just choose, if we could just decide today what it is we want to work on, what would it be? What are some of the problems we care about? And 4 things came up really, really quickly between our team. The first thing was education. How about we could use all this creativity and all this talent we have here under this roof to solve some things in education? What about science? Could we make science and technology more fun and cool and interesting? Could we make healthcare a little more human? And what about arts and culture? How do we apply our talents to that? And the good news was we all agreed that this is what we want to do. The bad news was none of our clients matched any of these categories. And we didn't want to be one of these companies that does one fun project a year and 90% of the stuff we do is not all that interesting. And we really committed to saying, you know what, we want to do all our projects in these areas. We want to really transition to focusing all our energy on the things we actually care about. And I'm happy to report we are not only alive, we actually tripled in size since then. We have this grandly amazing space. We have this amazing client roster where every single client we have, we deeply, deeply admire. Every meeting we get with them is exciting. Learning about them is exciting. And most importantly, what we're doing now is no longer advertising. It's no longer just creating things for the sake of business. It has bigger dimensions. We're looking at things with more objectives than just profit maximization. And we're really creating products and stories that matter, products and stories that address these issues. And what I want to do is I want to give you a taste of some of these products we have built. And while I do this, I also want to tell you how we came up with some of the solutions we came up with and how you might be able to apply them. So 4 tools. Number 1, be a design journalist. Go out there, be curious, relate to people, and uncover some things you haven't known before. And the project I want to share with you here started with this type of problem. So you'll see all the colored areas are countries that still have a literacy rate under 70%. A fair amount of people still dealing with this problem. When we looked at India specifically, we saw that only 15% of students in India had access to high schools, with only 7% graduating. And the project we tried to address this with is called the Islay Project, which is a partnership with Rice University and NTU in Singapore. And the idea is to give students that don't have access to schools a really inexpensive $30 tablet powered by solar cells that allows them to get a basic education until the education system there is at a point where the government can provide enough schools. And what we learned at the very beginning is that we didn't know anything meaningful enough to actually create a solution. We were so far away from this world. So we actually hopped on a plane, and we see Henrik, who's the lead designer on the project, just hanging out and finding out information and testing some of our initial ideas, which didn't work at all. It was really great to find it out at the very beginning and build this relationship with the community. We also did field tests. So we built these really ugly, simple prototypes and left them with the kids for 4 weeks. And I did a bet with the professor that they would throw them away after the second day because the user interface was horrendous. And it turned out it was hard for us to actually reclaim them back. So some things we learned were bad news, and we had to go back to the drawing board. Some other things we learned were really good news. And it just sort of broke them down into some of the challenges that we didn't really think of when we started designing here in our office in LA. There's no reliable power supplies, barely any internet connectivity. There's a lot of local languages we had to account for. Distribution and maintenance issues. There's just no infrastructure in these villages. There was also an issue around training, because we saw there's no one qualified within about 40 miles that could actually train or maintain a piece of hardware. And then engagement. We also saw, well, how can you give a 6-year-old tablet and expect that kid to learn a whole curriculum without a teacher? But on the upside, we saw some really great things that we wouldn't have realized without that design journalism expedition. We focused a lot about access to college, but realized it's not just about that. Just access to college is not going to solve this issue. These communities need really smart kids to create opportunities in their communities and not just drain all the smart kids to the cities. So how can we also create a type of education that really focuses on entrepreneurship and really builds local ideas and startups and opportunities? Culture, we went in the beginning, said, no, everything has to be English, and we quickly learned, well, it shouldn't be. We should teach English, but we should also respect the local culture, the local languages. And there was a whole peer learning and mentorship idea that came out of this as well, that ended up in the publication of this book that was just put together yesterday, actually. We had a school in India work together with a school in LA for 10 weeks, and the kids started writing each other letters through their little iSlates. And it was incredible to see the kind of insights and learning that came out of that. And it was a very small pilot program, but we're right now in the process of figuring out a way to scale this up to 50,000 students next year that are slated to get these iSlates. And all of these ideas just came out of this simple idea of being curious and going down on the ground and really learning and trying to understand new things. Something you can apply without going to India as well. The second thing is this idea of imagination and just really breaking limits, and I love this quote: if you can't solve a problem, it's because you're playing by the rules. What we often do when we face big problems and big challenges, we enter this 6-week agreement with our clients where we say, for 6 weeks, we're going to throw out all limitations. There's no budget limitation, no technological limitation, no political limitation. We're just going to think big, and we're going to design the best possible user experience. From there, we'll work backwards. Once we arrive there, we can work backwards and see what's realistic. But what that allowed us to do is to get everyone on board and really think big. And once you have this big shared vision, you'll always get there 80%. And 80% of the big vision is so much better than 20% out from the status quo. So allow yourself that time to just think big. You can always scale back later. So the project I want to talk about here in terms of imagination is a project we got to do with the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama. And again, I had an opportunity to jump on a plane, spend some time with these scientists in the rainforest, and really start learning about their work. They were in a big capital campaign. They had to tell the world why what they did was important because they needed money from the world. Scientists are extremely genius in doing science, but notoriously bad in telling the world why their science is important. So our mission here was to really understand these scientists and tell a compelling story. And our trip there looked something like this. We don't have the sound hooked up, but you don't need it because you're not going to understand much of what the scientist says anyways. But it was kind of trying to decipher what he's talking about and trying to really drill in and at times asking him to talk to us like a 6-year-old so we could create these bigger connections. And one of the things that we found in these interviews is all these scientists are driven by pure curiosity, by questions that sometimes they get to answer and sometimes they spend their whole life trying to answer, but they're not managing to do it. So when we started creating a first interactive experience around it, it was anchored around this idea of questions. So you can now go to the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute website, find these scientific questions, but we also smuggled a few fun questions in there, like do monkeys cheat, or are sloths drug addicts? And it's just another thing we're trying to do is hooking you into the experience somehow, even if you're not a subject matter expert. You can go deeper and learn a bit about their programs, and then we ended up with a slide where you actually can end up at the scientist standing in a rainforest talking about their science. And it's very clear where we got this idea, right? Like we just tried to figure out how can we replicate this incredible experience we got to have by being there to people that don't have the chance to actually go there in person. So second tool is imagination. At this point in the presentation, everybody thinks we have this amazing job where we get to travel the world to all these exciting places. So I want to curb the enthusiasm a little bit and talk about healthcare. We do quite a bit of work here in town with UCLA Health, and we did a similar exercise of design journalism, but it can also look like this. It actually took us through the entire hospital, and we tried to figure out how they communicate all their metrics and how their employees learn about the performance of the organization and what to do about it. And at some point we saw this board and we pointed at it and said, well, what is this? And they're like, well, here's how we print out our performance metrics and shared with everyone. So we took a picture and then in another leap of faith said, well, why couldn't this look something like this? Why can't data be more interesting? Why can't we make it more accessible? And why can't there be a story in data? So very similar type of thinking and just very high level at that point. Third tool, human-centered thinking. How do you put the user, your customer, your patient, whoever your audience is, how do you put your audience first at everything you do? People ignore design that ignores people. It's the mantra here. And another tool we use, it's called an experience map. And what we do in the experience map, we're trying to map user interactions on an axis of commitment level. What we find is that most design briefs require a really high user commitment. Give me money, buy a product, donate money, share this on Facebook. All amazing things, but you really have to build a relationship with me before I'm willing to do any of these things. So I'm going to show you a map we did for LACMA, the LA County Museum of Art. They have an online collection of 70,000 items, spent a significant amount of funds to digitize them, put them in a database, share them on the web, and then nobody showed up to watch it. We looked at different ways of getting the user comfortable with that experience before we get them into choosing what department, what artist they want to see. They might not know what artist they want to see. So the first zone we played with was, it's a zone of surprise. How do we surprise the user the second they hit the site? How do we move on to exploration? So once I was surprised by something, I'm engaged, I might dig deeper. From that point, I can go into viewing the art and really experiencing the art itself. And if I had a good experience doing that, the chances are I can get people to share it. And I'm going to show you how this project actually looked in the end. So you can remix LACMA's collection. And instead of seeing artists' names or department names or having to know a lot about the arts, you can click on things like horns or hair or bearded man. And it just made it really simple and really easy for people who are not art scholars to start engaging with the art. And we're always trying to bring this element of fun and access into areas that are usually not very fun or engaging to begin with. Lastly, and this is very simple, the idea of rapid iteration, which is amazing on the web, because you can just put things up and scrap them and redo them a lot quicker than you can do it in the real world. It's a lot harder with a building than with a website. So Guy Kawasaki is, of course, a big follower of that method. And the example I want to share is our most recent launch, which was an educational initiative for TED called TED-Ed. we ended up building this project within a period of 4 months, and we gave ourselves a 4-month window to launch something, and a year window to get it perfect. And the great thing about that is you get to move quickly, you have to move quickly, and you get real users using your product very early on. And you can actually go out to these users and say, well, we know this is not perfect, we need your feedback, we need your involvement to get this product to be all it can be. So it doesn't only allow you to release quickly, it also allows you to build a great community. So, 4 tools, here's the quiz. But this being pretty late in the day, the quiz is not about what I talked about. To whom do any of these devices look somewhat familiar but a little older than what they resemble? Anyone sees any similarities to a product you might have in your pocket? Yeah? So we're comparing a pocket radio from 1958, the Brown T3, to the Apple iPod, the 1962 Brown T100 to the Apple Power Mac G5, and 1959 speaker LE1 to the Apple iMac. And I think it's pretty amazing to just look at this form factor. But I'm not putting this up there to say Apple's designs suck and they copied people. As a matter of fact, Steve Jobs always said design is not about what a product looks like or feels like, it's about how it works, right? And if you look at it from the how it works perspective, there's an incredible amount of innovation here. The main reason I'm putting this slide up is as a context for one of the most amazing designers that very few people know about. And his name is Dieter Rams, and he designed all these products back in the 50s and 60s. And Dieter Rams said, very much in line with how I started the talk, it's not just about the form and the feel going into how it works. There's a whole new level of design and design thinking that's needed. And this new goal is all about design and designing products and services and experiences that can enable us to survive on this planet, right? It really goes back to this bigger idea of designing for business, designing for culture, designing for nature. And I hope that some of you in the room that are running your businesses and starting your businesses really take on this larger challenge and help solve this larger challenge. It was amazing to see the previous speakers plowing forward on that with such force. And that will conclude the talk. Thank you.